Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about casting off on a round loom. There are different ways of casting off and every project needs a certain way of casting off, from loose and stretchy to just normal traditional. And today I will show you how to cast off with a little help of the knitting loom. This is like the traditional cast off, only now you use the loom as a kind of tool to make the stitches nice and even. In this video you see knit and purl alternating be done. You can also do this of course with only a knit stitch. There are several ways of casting off, and on the YouTube channel of Loom and Knitting by Meek you can find them on the playlist Cast On and Cast Off. Well, it may be that especially in the beginning you find it rather difficult to give the same stretch and tension everywhere. Today I am going to show you a way in which you actually let the loom do the job with the traditional cast off. In this case all stitches look even. You almost get the same tension everywhere, but you still quite do a kind of loose cast off. That looks pretty tricky at the beginning, but when you have done that a few times you will see there is an order in it, and once you have that order in your head and mind, this is a perfect way to finish a project. This project is knitted in rib stitch, and in this case it is a yoga sock, and I want to give the cast off part of my yoga sock the same elasticity as much as possible, like I gave that to my cast on, and have the same stretch as the sock part as well. How are you going to start with that? I knit exactly the same stitches as I did in the project, so I cast off in pattern rib stitch, so knit 1 purl 1. Of course you can also use it with just a knit stitch, and then you use the knit stitch you used with a project. Well, you knit 2 stitches. The second stitch you move to your first stitch, and when you cast off traditional you would pull bottom loop over the top loop, but we are not going to do that yet. You are going to add that second stitch you have knitted. You don't knit over, and you always keep that one empty pack in between. It will give you the necessary stretch and tension to the project and cast off edge. This is your first stitch again. Then you knit the next stitch, the second. Pay attention to your tension here. Just as you see here that you are not doing one stitch looser or tighter than the other. Just pull a bit at your working yarn. Now knit over stitch or pack 1 and you move it. In the beginning it will be a bit tricky because you don't get any stretch at all here when you start casting off. You move your new stitch 1, the one you knitted over, 1 pack further. You knit the next stitch, actually your second stitch, you knit over, pack 1, bottom over the top, and move it, and put your second stitch back on your first pack or stitch. And think about the empty pack. You knit the next one on pack 2, the bottom loop over the top loop on pack 1. You can also say this is pack 1, first stitch, knit pack 2, second stitch, knit over pack 1, move stitch 1 to the empty pack, move stitch 2 to pack 1 or stitch 1, and don't knit over. This is your new pack or stitch 1. and you repeat that drill all the time. You knit the second stitch, leave it on the same peg, knit over stitch 1 or peg 1, move it, and you move your second stitch to peg 1, and you don't knit over, and you adjust. I'll put another loom underneath it so it's a bit more slanted, so you can see from there. There are 2 here. Knit my first knit stitch, knit over peg 1. I'm actually casting off and I'm moving it. Stitch 2 at stitch 1, and here you can already see that the stitches are nice and even. You can see that better when you have casted off all the stitches. So your next stitch, you leave it, cast off peg 1, move your new first stitch and put your second stitch to the first and leave it. In the meantime, you correct and adjust continuously that there are no loops like this. Hold the working yarn. You are in charge of the working yarn, you're the boss, and you decide what it will look like. If necessary, you hold your working yarn here that it can't loop through, and you move it that way. Sometimes that's difficult. You can use another hook or your fingers and you pull, put or move the stitch around the peg, and you move this stitch to 1 again. In my case, I've marked everything. I find that easy, so I know I always have to do a purl stitch there, and you'll notice as you move on it will be also easier to move the stitches, and it will also get a bit stretchier because the tension on it will be less. And usually, yes, I always pull it around the peg a bit like this. You have to make sure if you knit with 2 or more strands, you put back 2 or more strands, or you will get a loop here you don't want to have. First and second together. Look, and here also adjust it by pulling a little bit. You leave it bottom over the top, because otherwise one stitch will be bigger than the other, and we don't want that, because we want it to be even. So you pull at it a little bit, not too much, because otherwise it's getting too tight, and you move the stitch. So knit over and move it to the empty peg. Well, I'm almost there, and every now and then I discover that in my enthusiasm I've already have knitted over that first stitch, and then I'm going to knit this one. Well, then you notice that indeed there is only 1 stitch left on the peg, and then you move it. I'll show you. The order is actually you knit the stitch. You knit over peg 1 and you move it, and you move stitch 2 to stitch 1. Therefore you can say right now, I pull it over and you knit the next stitch. I do think you will get a little less tension on it there, because then the peg no longer gives or actually hold the tension. You move the stitch and you put it back. So you move back 1 for stitch 1 to back 2. Ooh, that's funny. So that one, if you just keep the tension continuously, and actually because he's going to stretch it there, you get that same regular way of casting off. You knit your next stitch, and look here, you knit with multiple strands. Sometimes it's a jumble, and it is the intention that the right bottom loop is looped over the top one. What you can do here, look, you see here already a kind of division, and you could say I'm going to take a look over here, and then you divide those two. You can also do it like this, from the top or from the front of your loom. Just divide them there like this. So actually this is your top stitch. You divide them, and then you get the difference or distinction between those two stitches again, and you knit over. For me, this was also the first time. I showed it to you right away, and after one round of casting off you will discover that it goes a lot easier already. Well, your last stitch, look here, I had it. I'm chit-chatting too much, and now I put it back, and look here, you can already do something by looping the yarn. So you put it back, only one stitch, second to the first, and you are ready. And you knit over. Two options here. You cut off your working yarn or you don't. If you want to see if the tension is good and right for the project, then you don't cut off the working yarn yet. Why not? Because of it could be, especially when you knit socks and you are going to try them on to see how it fits, the edge is still just too tight, and then you can put it back on the loom. One method of casting off needs a little more yarn than the other way, so if you don't cut off the yarn, so you don't need to be doing a Russian join, in this case I do advise you to secure it a little bit. You pull at your loop, then you pull at it a little bit extra, and then you can fit your sock or other project. A lifeline might be a bit of help to you by putting the stitches back. You will find a video of that too on this channel, flat panel and on a round loom. Well, a project knitted in U-wrap always needs a bit of stretching and modifying, because on the loom it's pulled out in the width. But you can actually see here there is a nice, even and regular way of casting off. Look, and if you look at this, you see this one is actually just out of the loose wrist, so with no help, also in the traditional way. You see that the stitches are a bit more irregular. So you really pull and stretch it out completely, because it can sometimes take a while before it has the right stretch and tension. And I advise you to do this, because otherwise you don't see what the effect is of such a way of casting off, which should fit around the project. Look, it looks neat and even. So you can certainly use this way, because now you can also turn it over or fold it, and then it actually goes along with the knitting. Yes, and also here with this way that I just showed, you can play with your tension. You can give it the stretch and tension your project needs. You could even try it this way with 20 pecks in between, that you get a little more tension in between the stitches. The tension will be even a bit more, so you will also get bigger stitches. So I've bumped you with enough information. This is a nice method when you just start to loom it to cast off, and then you actually let the loom do the job. You hardly have to pay attention to it yourself, to the tension. Just adjust it a little bit in between when you have knitted the stitches. Okay, I hope to see you soon in another video, and I hope to have helped you a bit with your way of casting off. Have a nice day. Bye bye.